Over a third of young Americans do not believe that the United States is the greatest country in the world. According to a poll by Pew Research, 36% of adults polled under 30 say they actually prefer other countries to the United States. Joining us now from Campus Reform is Eduardo Neret. Eduardo, what do you make of this, particularly as we see young protesters in Hong Kong and Iran who see our American flag as something to be honored, as a role model, if you will?
Well, it is certainly strange to see that around the world and then see how our young Americans think here. And this type of anti-American trend is something we've been covering for several years now at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform. And it's important to note the two major reasons why it's happening. So the first is education. By the time that students get to college here, they've gone through several years of anti-American liberal bias from their teachers, from administrators, and it just perpetuates over time. And then the other area we see that is in media and politics. And the best example of this is President Obama, who, when he was president, he championed these messages of anti-Americanism in his speeches. You know, we all remember the America Apology Tour he went on. We remember what Michelle Obama said, that the first time she was proud of her country was when she was an adult. And so if you're a young American and this is what you've grown up with, it's no wonder that a third of young Americans are going to think this way.
Eduardo, I think a lot of Republicans would like to change the tenor of education in this country to be more balanced, to be more pro-U.S. And it really comes down to the humanities, history and economics and so forth. How can we do that? What's the best way to approach evening the playing field for conservative arguments?
Sure. Well, I think it's going to be a bit difficult to change the professors inside the classroom. That's going to be a lot harder to do. But what Americans can do, and what I encourage them to do, is to support conservative activism on campuses. So there are a number of groups out there who teach history to students, who push conservative messaging on campus, who, work with their student newspapers to push these messages. And I think the one good thing from my experience in interviewing some of these liberal students on campuses is that even though they disagree with me, often at the end of our conversation, I see that they're willing to change their minds. They're willing to consider other points of thought. So if you just think out there, if one American could talk to a young American student, whether it's in your family, someone that you know personally, and if you could just get them to change their minds a little bit, open up their minds, then we would definitely push a long way on this issue.
Eduardo, I think calling Michelle Obama and Obama himself anti-American is pushing it to an extreme that is both unnecessary and incendiary. And the other thing is to be self-critical, right? Part of what makes America such an intensely powerful country is an ability for us to look at ourselves and recognize that we have flaws, we have faults, there are things we can do better, and to lump all of that into some soup of anti-Americanism rather than saying, oh, rah, rah, we're great. Again, I'm not sure what value you're adding by labeling that tendency of being self-critical, blanketly labeling that anti-American, as opposed to lauding the degree to which being self-critical is a strength.
Well, I want to be absolutely clear. What I said is that they, in their messaging, in some of their speeches, they pushed a lot of these anti-American viewpoints, which were, America's not necessarily better than the rest of the world.
That's not anti-American.
Well, but I never said they were anti-American. And when you go to the issue at hand here, you are right in the sense that America has not been a perfect country. We are not a perfect country. But what makes us one of the best countries in the world, what makes us better than others, is that we have system in place to correct our ills, to correct these things that you talk about historically that maybe were wrong and incorrect. And I think to equate us with other countries around the world, like President Obama did, certainly isn't a pro-America, above America, everybody else message. And so that's what I was alluding to.
Eduardo, I want to point out something that every student goes through. I'm going to admit something right now. When I was in college, not much older than you are now, I was a socialist until I got my first paycheck when I graduated, and I met something called tax. Then I became a capitalist. Now I'm a little right wing of Attila the Hun, because I would rather keep all of my money so I could reinvest it and create jobs regardless of who's in the White House. I think government wastes money, whoever they are. So it's not a big surprise that young Americans are saying, gee, I want to be socialist, I want to be right or left. The fact is, when you get into the real world, it really chews you up and spits you out.
So you just have 10 seconds, Eduardo. Is it all about age?
I think so. I hope so. I hope when young Americans get into the workforce, as Kevin said, they'll change their minds. Because if not, we're going to end up with a candidate like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, and we can see that they certainly have the youth support.
Eduardo, you handle yourself beautifully. Great to have you on. Please come back and talk to us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Queen Elizabeth.